where people post things about how they don't get tipped. Things like, I'm a military wife, I should get this meal for free, then a 0 tip. Or it'll say like, here, go to college, that's a tip. Or I'm poor, sorry. What's up guys, this is Alan again, and I want to give you guys a quick update on what's going on with California's junk fee ban regarding on how that affects the hospitality industry, especially service charges that are usually included in the bill. So if you haven't seen the original video, you should go check it out, but also give you a recap of what's going on, even up to this. So before we start, I just want to clarify that I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just reading this article, and even when I looked at it earlier, I found some mistakes. So nobody's perfect. I'm doing the best I can to explain this. So what happened was there was a junk fee ban that was intended to concert tickets, car rentals, movie theaters. People would order like tickets to something, and then at the end they're like, plus this convenience fee, plus this fee. And then in the end it's like, wait, I thought these seats for this concert was $45. Like, how the heck did it end up 60? And you don't really know it until right before you put in your credit card information. And a lot of people are like, why did I go through all this? And nobody said anything about this. And unfortunately, it looks like somehow it included restaurants, service fees, which have been standard, especially in fine dining restaurants, and has been even more popular, because of the lockdown. And a lot of restaurants are struggling to survive. So they implemented this fee. It seems like it became more common just to secure the income of a lot of restaurant workers, because a lot of restaurant workers and restaurants in general, we still haven't made a full recovery from the lockdown. So the original bill was California, the Senate Bill 478, which was the junk fee ban. And right before it was approved on June 6th, just 3 weeks right here. So on just a few weeks before that got approved, there was an amendment, SB 1524, which says that restaurants are exempt from this because, one, the service charge fee, it's stated in the menu, so it's not a hidden fee. Restaurant guests come in and see the menu, and it's clearly saying that, okay, there is a 20% service charge, and sometimes they'll even say something like, there's a 6% that goes into some healthcare. A lot of, it's not just California or San Francisco, like a lot of places are doing this as well. It's like not a hidden fee because the guests know about it before they order the food. Also, in fine dining restaurants, when you make a reservation, sometimes they'll even have an agreement where you actually have to read it, and which explains the service fee. And you have to agree it before you can even make the reservation. So you have to, they make sure that the guests know what these fees are before they're even allowed to finalize the reservation. So it looks like we're moving into a good direction in that sense, but that's just California. The rest of the country still might face hurdles, and this is what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so this article is from Eater. This is a very good website to get a lot of, especially if you work in the restaurant industry or bar industry, this is a very good place to check out, as it is almost like it gets different sources and puts it together in one centralized location. So let's check this out. How the FTC's junk fee ban affects restaurants. Do restaurants fall under the FTC's proposed rule to ban hidden mandatory fees? California recently said no, but restaurants across the country are bracing for more confusion. So I know I read the comments from the first video that I said this. Oh, California, boo, blah, blah. But I also mentioned in the video that this is going to affect the other 49 states. We just happen to be ahead of the game. And even then, I don't think a lot of restaurant workers even knew about, or California restaurant workers even knew about this was going on. And this is going to affect the entire country. This is the FTC and the Federal Trade Commission. So this junk fee is going to start to be implemented through the whole country. And hopefully they follow suit of what we did in California and put restaurants exempt for that. So let's take a look at this. Okay. Restaurant service fees are now a commonplace. As of 2023, the National Restaurant Association estimates that 15% of restaurants are using some form of additional charges, frequently used to replace tips. These fees are typically in the range of 20%. So I would have to add a little detail. Sometimes it's used to replace tips, but a lot of service charges, the service charge also is used to tip out the back of the house, the kitchen staff. At their best, restaurant service fees circumvent the problem of tipping in order to more equitably compensate employees. At their worst, they're confusing and potentially not allocated to improving wages. This is a little bit confusing. Some places did try to include tips in the pricing, and it did not work. Like, Americans were not ready for this. Even though this is standard everywhere else in the world, Americans were not just ready for this. It's unfortunate. Even though the bill ends up being the same. Like, if the 15 or 20% was already included in the prices versus you tipping the 20% at the end, the total mathematically will come out the same. But the problem is that a lot of people think that it is a freedom to tip somebody and it should not be forced. Our tipping culture was unfortunately founded in has a very dark history if you look at where the tipping culture came from. And it's unfortunately that it's still stuck in today's system, and it's gonna take a while before we actually move away from the tipping system. But so some places that did this the European way by including a tip in their pricing did not work. But however imperfect their implementation, such charges will be abolished if the FTC follows through with its plans to eliminate what it calls junk fees, enshrining tipping as the custom of the land. So what this does, it makes tipping optional. And we've seen, if you work in the industry, you've probably seen like Facebook pages or Instagram where people post things about how they don't get tipped. Things like, I'm a military wife, I should get this meal for free, then a 0 tip. Or it'll say like, here, go to college, just a tip, things like that. Or I'm poor, sorry. In February, the FTC finished soliciting public comments on its proposed regulation to ban deceptive acts or practices concerning fees, better known as junk fees or drip pricing. Drip pricing is just junk fees is the more colloquial term. Drip pricing is the technical definition word for adding surcharges at the end of the bill without making it clear in the beginning. This was followed by an informal hearing in April, with the final decision expected in the fall. In California, Senate Bill 478, a bill similar to what the FTC is proposing that makes it illegal for businesses to advertise or list a price for a good or service that does not include all required fees or charges other than certain government taxes and shipping costs, went into effect July 1st. On June 6th, just 3 weeks before the deadline, Senator Bill Dodd introduced SB 1524, which carved out an exemption for restaurants so long as they present fees clearly and conspicuously. So a lot of people were already doing this. And there were lawsuits where they didn't, where restaurants would not put that on the menu. And those restaurants were sued and they lost. Obviously, nobody wanted to deceive their customers. So a lot of places have already done this and presented this on the menu. So don't get surprised. It's like, here, like we've seen it before, like, oh, parties of 8, blah, blah, it has 18% included. This is like even before the service charge. It's, most places I've seen, or they don't hide this. Like I said, the place I work at, you have to agree to this before you're even allowed to make a reservation. Unanimously approved by the Assembly, it was passed through the state Senate and signed into law by the governor on June 29, just 48 hours before the July 1st deadline. Though a reprieve for California restaurateurs, the clock is still ticking on the national scale, with many restaurants in panic mode. Here's what you should know. Outside of California, there are places in the country where it is legal to pay under the minimum wage for the hourly rate for service, for jobs that have tips. So for them, they depend on gratuity even more. Just like $2 something in certain places. Literally, if you worked 8 hours, you'll only make $16 in entire shift. That's hourly wage. To put that into perspective, the San Francisco minimum wage per hour is more than $18. So in San Francisco, 1 hour makes more than what some people make in a day, which is unfair because now those people cannot survive just on their hourly pay. Why restaurants have service fees? The problems that tipping exacerbates, racism, sexism, harassment, and exploitation, are well established. I mean, yes, on the previous podcast regarding this, I showed the chart where different ethnicities of the service worker, not the customer, gets tipped differently depending on their race. And even though it was not discussed in that article, we've all, especially if you work in the service industry, we know that gender also affects how much they get tipped. With some restaurants, actually gender and harassment. Let's mix those. For example, when a server or waitress doesn't give away her number to a customer, they'll tip 0. Say, I was nice to you and you didn't give me your number, 0 tip. So they're actually punishing them for doing their job. Like, their job is not to get hit on. They're just being nice to you because that's their job. So they think that, oh, I'm being nice to you, therefore you should give me, like, you didn't give me your number, well, then I'm not going to give you your tip. So they're using that to weaponize, they're weaponizing the tipping system. So this is an example of what service charge is supposed to prevent. Around the world, restaurateurs fed up with this corrupt system have turned to service fees, except for those in New York and Massachusetts, where service fees cannot be shared with the kitchen staff. This is what I was talking about earlier. Yeah, this is unfortunate. Like, I don't live there, so I don't really understand these laws, but in California, service charge is different than gratuity. For example, a restaurant that charges 20% service charge, 15% of that 20 might go to the front of the house and 5 would be redistributed with the kitchen. To remove the reliance on tips to pay a living wage and the abusive relationship with diners that tipping amplifies. Many use the revenue to more evenly distribute pay between the front of the house, servers, bussers, hosts, and the back of the house, cooks, dishwashers, who historically earn a lot less. I mentioned this before, dishwashers are probably the most important part of the kitchen. You can't serve food without cleaning plates. And I've worked in places where a dishwasher could call in sick and the whole place, we have to have managers wearing a suit, jump behind, spraying down the dishes and washing. I mean, and they hold a lot of weight on how a restaurant can function. Some restaurants also see service fees as a way to address the chronic problem in restaurants. Few employees want to be managers, and 35% of restaurant managers quit within the first year. Yep, I've been a manager myself, and I could not handle it because the pay sucked. It didn't justify the amount of stress, and just being a bartender just paid more. Front of house workers typically see the majority of their earnings coming from tips, not hourly wages. So many servers, even if they show leadership skills, don't want to be promoted to management because without tips, it usually means more responsibility for less money. True. And it's also way more stressful because you almost have to take home your job because even when you're on vacation, you're still answering emails. So you really, as a manager, don't have a lot of vacation time. Like, a lot of managers I've seen could not even survive, even if they were experienced managers. At some restaurants with service fees, the money is used to bump up the pay for managers, provided they spend the majority of their time on the floor rather than administrative tasks. this can be for hourly paid managers. So the laws vary, but as far as I know, in California, a salaried manager cannot get tipped, but an hourly manager can. For example, if you are a bar manager and you are bartending and you are paid hourly, then you do collect the tips. But if you do admin work and you're not working the floor, then you do not collect the tips. Restaurateurs I've spoken to with say implementing service fees helps restaurant retention as well. High Street Hospitality, a Philadelphia restaurant group, operates 6 concepts, 2 of them using service fees. Between this and other high street initiatives aimed at creating better jobs that people want to stay in, founder Ellen Yin estimates a staff turnover of under 40%, far below the industry average of 73%. Yes, I agree. I love working in a restaurant, but I cannot sacrifice the inability to pay my bills, pay my rent, and also places that have health insurance, an employer sponsored health insurance program also has a high retention rate. Why the FTC aims to abolish service fees. The US government seems determined to stamp out this business model. The intention is to protect consumers from unnecessary or hidden fees from big companies like airlines or concert ticketing agencies. So we talked about this. This is a completely different intention. We're trying to get people to not get ripped off, especially places like Ticketmaster or airlines. They make a lot of money. They're definitely ripping people off because most of these services don't include the necessity of hiring anyone else. It's all done by computer software. So there's not like somebody actually doing something that makes you need to charge the guests more. It's not like that extra $5 convenience fee is used to pay someone to actually, it doesn't hire, you're not hiring anyone extra to do these services. I mean, in many ways, buying your ticket online requires less employees. However, the proposed language not only encompasses restaurants, but makes clear that the FTC has considered the impact on the role of tipping. As applied to restaurants, the proposed rule would require the prices of the menu to be inclusive of any mandatory fees. The trade regulation rule on unfair or deceptive fees states. The FTC seems to acknowledge that for most, tipping is a preferable alternative to restaurants' other options, scaring off customers with the sticker shock of service-inclusive pricing. Yeah, whether it's inclusive or the guest pays at the end, the total bill mathematically is going to be the same. But we are so used to the tipping system that a 15% increase in menu item price will scare a lot of people, even though if you tipped 15 to 20% at the end, it's going to be the same thing. But we're just used to seeing these. For example, like if you tip 20% on a $16 burger, psychologically it's different than if that 20% was added to the $16 burger and you did not have to, it's all psychological because we're just so ingrained into this tipping system that people almost cannot comprehend that the higher price includes a tip. Mathematically is the same, but the Americans are just not ready for this drastic change just yet. We thus assume that these restaurants would choose a return to the traditional tipping model in response to the proposed rule. Yes, but we've seen what happened during the pandemic. People just stopped tipping, and it almost became like people started to become against the restaurant industry, even though a lot of people eat out now more than ever, and especially with delivery of food. So yeah, we've seen during the lockdown, a lot of people just stopped tipping. The intentions of the California Senate and the FTC to protect customers from drip pricing may be knowable. For example, you go to book a flight, you find a price that feels right. Only after several minutes, multiple screens, clicks, scrolls, you see prices for checking a bag or seat selection. That's before the airline tries to sell you various forms of insurance. Or you arrive to pick up a rental car to discover previously undisclosed charges. These fees do feel hidden, but restaurant service charges are not junk fees. Rather than a cash grab by owners, they actually cost restaurants more, as unlike tips, the fees are seen as revenue by the IRS and subject to payroll tax. So this is interesting. So it's considered part of the revenue. So the restaurant actually pays more, and they're almost doing this to keep their front of house workers. So they're paying more in taxes so that they can retain more of their employees. Although the Restaurant Service Charge Tax Fairness Act, introduced to Congress in May, proposes that these fees be treated like tips, which are self-reported by employees, the FTC has cast its net too wide, and the bycatch will be restaurants that are using service fees to create better jobs. How restaurants are reacting to the proposal. Several operators who have been using service fees to fund better jobs and benefits all told either that they are in favor of legislation that would require transparency around where service fees go. Where they differ is in what they expect to do if these state or federal laws cannot be stopped. I mentioned this before. Restaurants are not trying to rip people off. They're struggling. That's a fact. Like, the restaurant industry has not recovered from the pandemic. It hasn't. This is to keep service workers, hospitality workers from leaving. I know so many high-level bartenders who completely change careers because it doesn't pay enough. Not only do people not go to restaurants as much as they used to, the people who go, they don't tip. So things like this costs the restaurants more money to make sure that their employees live with, livable income. Some say that this will likely push them towards a service inclusive pricing. This is where a restaurant eliminates the dependency on tips by increasing menu prices. Like I said, this is what they do in Europe and the rest of the world. But Americans, they just are so used to the tipping system that the sticker shock when everything goes up by 20%. We've seen this happen already, and a lot of those restaurants have to go back to traditional tipping methods. Many restaurants cite the Union Square Hospitality Group's aborted attempt at service-included pricing as evidence that it can't be done. But it's also important to note that this group, which had good intentions and administrative expertise, was also trying to do it across 13 restaurants with over 1,000 employees. That's a big ship to turn around. Many smaller operators have made this change and stuck with it. So the restaurant I work at is a fine dining restaurant. Ours is not inclusive, but it does have a service charge, and we put that on the menu. But our sister restaurant, which is the more casual restaurant, higher volume, during the lockdown, we did try the 20% service fee, and the regulars did not like it. So that side, it resorted to reverting back to traditional tipping system. As I mentioned earlier, the service charge works a lot better in fine dining establishments, but for most places, people still prefer traditional tipping system. Before restaurants were exempted from Bill 478, one LA restaurateur using service fees who requested she remain anonymous said that she would love to use a service included model, but she is still concerned that customers are not ready to pay for what restaurant experiences cost without the guise of the discretionary tip that creates the illusion of lower prices. As I mentioned, it's mathematically the same. Your bill at the end doesn't change if it's inclusive. And a lot of people I talk to, they honestly don't care because they still make the same amount of money, but it's the guest experience that makes this really hard to implement because they don't want to see the illusion of higher menu prices. Instead, she was planning on reluctantly shifting back to a tipped model while also raising prices in order to continue covering the staff health and retirement benefits. She expected both tip percentages and earnings for staff to decrease as prices rise. Nationally, only 32% of service workers have employer-sponsored health care benefits. Yeah, this sucks. Like, a lot of hospitality workers who don't have employee-sponsored healthcare benefits, a lot of them don't even have any health insurance. So they're living life in fear that something can happen to them. Like, they might get hit by a car, or they might get sick, food poison, and they would have to foot the bill. And what this causes, like, a lot of people who get sick end up going to work because they can't afford to get the healthcare that they need. But what this does is that they just infect other coworkers and everyone else gets sick. And this isn't just in the restaurant industry, but it is very prominent because a lot of restaurant workers don't have health insurance. In San Francisco, where health coverage for businesses with over 20 employees is mandated by the city, it's common for restaurants to add a 5% charge to cover that bill. Bill 478 would have made that impossible. That money has to come from somewhere, so prices would have gone up. To be fair, it seems unlikely that the FTC was thinking about restaurants or what they use service fees for. We know this is true because when they, in California at least, when 478 was passed, they said that they were not thinking about restaurants. They were literally not trying to screw over hospitality workers, but because, you know, the way you write a bill or a law, it cannot have a lot of room for interpretation. So you have to really be careful on how you word things, because you have to enforce it the way that it was written. So that, they definitely did not expect that, because I don't think anyone, when you put the service charge on the bill, nobody really thinks that they're getting ripped off because it's right on the menu. They know it before they even order the food. Restaurants are the collateral damage in a separate fight. This is made clear by a rhetorical question from Ted Merman, the director of California Low Income Consumer Coalition, which co-sponsored Bill 478. Why is the only one of the dozens affected industries complaining? Asked Merman in an interview with New York Times. The question betrays a fundamental lack of understanding of the industry that California and FTCs are seeking to regulate. Will the FTC learn from Bill 478 and amend it now to exempt restaurants? Or will this battle go down to the last second too? A better question to ask, from state level to federal, why would law intended to deal with unfair business practices of companies like Ticketmaster or United Airlines be the same applied to a 120-seat restaurant in Austin serving braised oyster mushrooms with polenta? As I mentioned, a lot of states, you can legally pay your employees less than minimum wage if they are tipped employees. We're talking about people's lives that can get destroyed by this bill. I know there's a lot of hate in California, but I really do think the FTC will learn from this, because a huge portion of Americans currently work or have worked in the hospitality industry. A lot of struggling artists, like even the successful artists, like a lot of actors, writers, singers have worked in the industry. So hopefully they'll speak up and support this, you know, exemption from restaurants. Because right now it seems that the government doesn't know, they have no problem eating French Laundry or some Michelin-star restaurant for their martini lunches, but they don't even have any idea how this would affect the people who are making this food and serving their tables. Are good, like, they don't have any idea how they're going to be affected. So anyways, let me know what you guys think. Should the rest of the country follow California in exempting restaurant workers from this junk fee ban? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed that, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.